Tonight is the night for Liberal leadership candidates. They are set to face off in French in Montreal in just over 2 hours. Mark Carney leads his opponents, Chrystia Freeland, Karina Gould, and Frank Baylis, in fundraising and public opinion polling. So how much will he be on the defense tonight? And will the debates ultimately matter for Liberals casting ballots for the leadership as soon as Wednesday? Let's bring in our front bench to talk about that. Sharon Carr is former Deputy Chief of Staff to former Finance Minister Bill Morneau. She's now a partner at Sovereign Advisory. Shakir Chambers is a vice president at Oyster Group. He worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. Former interim ADP National Director Carl Bélanger is here with me in studio. He's now the president of Traction Strategies. And rounding us out tonight, Laura Stone is a Queen's Park reporter for the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody. Happy debate night. Carl, I'll start with you. In general, do you think this debate will matter for the leadership race? We really have not seen a lot of them, any of them, face off against each other, but otherwise just a few interviews here and there.
Yeah, so I guess the good news for me is that my expectations are very low. So I don't think I'll be disappointed, so in that sense, I don't think it matters. The truth is that it might be painful, especially for a French audience, to listen to this. We'll see if Mark Carney is able to actually communicate and articulate and defend himself in French. But at the same time, I don't feel he's going to be under attack much. I think he can have, the candidates lay out what they've already said. Is there one that will come with a surprise? Maybe, but somehow I doubt it. So I don't think it will change much. Maybe tomorrow, where they're more comfortable in English. But tonight, I don't expect much sparks.
Yeah, maybe, not tonight, but maybe tomorrow night it would have been Sharon Rubidala, but she's been disqualified now by the party from running. And Carl's right, like every conversation I had today with people associated with the various campaigns, I was like, so you going hard? What's going to happen? You're going to throw some punches? And like everyone was like, no, we're going to put forward our best foot and like talk about what we're going to do. Like nobody seemed to want to get into the mud at all.
Well, it's not too late. Who knows? Maybe Rubidala will show up and just like stick a little pole in the ground there and try to debate. But listen, I think what people want to see is fireworks, but I don't think we're going to see that because at the end of the day, these are the same people from the same party. We might see some friction between Freeland and Carney when it comes to the messaging around who is the center's candidate. But for the most part, I think everyone is going to be so focused on getting their French right because it does matter very much so in Quebec and parts of Canada that we're not going to see any mudslinging, but I think that'll change tomorrow potentially.
Shakir, what are your thoughts on the significance or potential significance of the debate? It is, like I said to Carl, the first time that we're seeing these candidates since, the beginning of January, really, when this got started in earnest, square off against each other.
Yeah, I mean, they can make it significant. There doesn't need to be mudslinging, but I think, Mark Carney is obviously the front runner here. I think the other rival candidates can, get some clarity on his positions. I think you have someone like Chrystia Freeland. If you look at her webpage, has dozens of policies out there. She can ask Carney where he stands on certain things, whether that's on, pipelines, whether that's on his carbon tax, whether that's on, the accounting for the budget that he's been trying to articulate, 2 budgets, one for operating, one for capital costs. Whatever that looks like, there should be some questions asked by the guy who's probably going to be the most powerful person in this country in about 2 weeks, because he hasn't been impressed by media that much, and he hasn't been impressed by rival candidates at all either. So I think for a guy in his position, there should be some clarity about what he's going to do once he assumes the role of prime minister.
What do you think, Laura? Do you anticipate that, like at the Ontario debate last week, where Doug Ford, who is the front runner in polling, was clearly put on the defense? Everyone was taking their shots at him. Do you think that the focus will be on Mark Carney during these debates?
He'll probably get a bit more pressure than the other candidates, but I don't think we're going to see people screaming at him as we did in the Ontario debate. I think it will be more of a love fest. I do think it's because, this debate's happening pretty late in the race. Mark Carney seems to be running away with it, and most Liberal supporters have probably made up their minds. I mean, all of these candidates want to save face at this point. They want to have confidence. They want to put forward their ideas. That's why they're running in this race. But I don't think they're going to be, putting needles in the eyes of the guy that could potentially be their boss in a couple of weeks. I think where this is more significant is to a broader audience who maybe hasn't been as tuned in to the Liberal race, maybe hasn't seen any of these candidates speak on publicly or on a stage yet. And this is their entry into the Canadian public, first with a French-speaking audience, and then more broadly with English Canada. And so this could be their first time being seen by millions of Canadians. So I think in that sense, the stakes are high, especially if we're launched into an election campaign in the next month or two. I think it actually does have quite a bit of significance for a broader election campaign coming out of this race.
Tonight, especially, it will be the question of Quebec. And there has been a shifting dynamic in the polls there, like in different parts of the country, but at the expense of other parties, versus especially the NDP and the rest of the country. You're looking at the Bloc, for example. What do you think that the candidates need to say to a Quebec audience tonight to secure that positioning, if that's at all possible, Carl?
Yeah, I'm not sure it is possible. And what's interesting is that right now there's a shift, but it's not caused by the Liberal leadership race. It's caused by Donald Trump and a tariff threat. The Liberals are benefiting from it for many reasons, and in Quebec there is a renewed sense of, that we need to stay in Canada to fight back against Donald Trump. So there's an opportunity there, but you can't brag about it because it's none of your doing. So you have to be very careful about how you position yourself and your party for the future, because it's very fragile and it can turn around very quickly. We've seen that in the past when it comes to Quebec sovereignty, and the PQ is still ahead in the polls in Quebec.
We had Conservatives come out today earlier this morning, one of them including Michelle Rempel-Garner, a Conservative MP from Alberta, to talk a little bit about their own view of this debate and the candidates. Let's take a listen, and then Sharon, I'll get you to weigh in.
And so tonight, it seems to me like the Liberal Party is about to, or attempting to, coronate Mark Carney, an unelected man who essentially has the same record as Justin Trudeau, because he has been advising Justin Trudeau in senior economic roles for many years.
So, Sharon, this is a Conservative, as I mentioned, Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner, kind of echoing what we've heard from Conservatives, which is they're not going to, their aim is to not let any daylight go between Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau. Carney's campaign telling some of our reporters that they're going to try and create that separation in tonight's debate. Will that be a challenge, both for him but to be fair for Chrystia Freeland, too, who sat in that cabinet for so long?
Well, it's one of those weird situations because we're hearing this message come from the Conservatives, but guess what? They're not on the stage there to sling those questions at him. And also the candidate that's missing from the stage there, who is the U.S. president, is also not there to kind of come in and be part of the argument. But when it comes to the Conservatives and their point to say that Carney is exactly the same as Trudeau, listen, they're going to keep doing that over and over. I would say people like Karina Gould and Chrystia Freeland are far more, I would say, aligned with this government as it stands. I've said this before to a lot of folks. We know the government has used Carney's name, whether it's for an economic roundtable or an advisory, but having actually worked in this government and understanding how they use external names and bodies, we saw this with Dominic Barton. While they are utilized and their opinions do matter at times, it's very much performative. It's for credibility. So was Carney there every single day providing them advice? No. Did he maybe talk to them a few times in a year? Sure. So he's going to keep saying, I'm not one of them. And the Conservatives are going to say, you are. But I don't think that's going to break through with the noise we're having around Trump.
What do you think about that, Shakir?
I mean, listen, it makes sense to try to brand Carney. I've said it before. I mean, we're on this panel. We know who Mark Carney is, but I think a lot of Canadians out there who are going to vote in a general election have no idea who Mark Carney is. So it makes sense to try to tie him to, a guy that was probably the most unpopular politician in our country for the past year and a half, 2 years. That's a smart strategy. So I think they're going to keep doing that, tie the Liberal record to Mark Carney, Justin Trudeau's record to Mark Carney, and say there's no daylight between those two. I think Sharon's right in terms of the frequency of the advice that Carney probably gave Trudeau. But I mean, his name was all over the economic advisory stuff. He was giving advice during COVID. These are just factual things. So what advice were you giving to Trudeau? What actually happened with the advice that you gave him? And I mean, they're trying to make him take blame for some of the disastrous economic record that the Liberals do have at this point in time. I think it makes sense.
Which kind of brings us back, Laura, to your original point that this is an opportunity for those candidates to address some of that stuff to a broader audience beyond the Liberals. Because my guess is the audience beyond the Liberals does really care about how close or not Mark Carney was to Justin Trudeau and the Trudeau record.
Very much so. I think the ghost of Justin Trudeau will be kind of haunting that stage tonight, as will Donald Trump, right? I mean, I think we've seen through the policies that these Liberal contenders have put forwards is them trying to distance themselves from the Trudeau record, be it through housing, be it through immigration, obviously environment and climate change. They've all tried to distance themselves from the consumer carbon tax. The Conservatives might be wishful thinking here that they're going to go after each other on these points. I'm not quite sure it's going to get to that level because they're all kind of tied into it together. But I do think they'll probably be, hopefully, facing some pointed questions about their past records, their past support of Trudeau policies and why they may differ from that now. I think, you see the Conservatives raising a stink about Carney time and time again. And I think that shows that they are concerned about him as a potential candidate in the next election. They obviously wanted to go up against Justin Trudeau in the next campaign. They didn't get their wish. And so they're now kind of preemptively striking against him. I think that does show that they view him as a much more formidable opponent than Mr. Trudeau. But we'll see if he has the chops, right? He hasn't really had a lot of exposure on a national stage. And so that will be a test for him as well in the debates of how well he can perform as a politician.
For sure.